At some point, we didn't lose our ability to feel. We learned not to. And that choice once made sense, but it comes with a cost. Because when we can't feel, we don't just lose access to emotions. We lose access to ourselves. So our system adapts. And if feeling isn't safe, we find other ways to regulate. We cope. And some people cope by staying busy, by working, by achieving things, by being productive all the time. And some cope through food, through sugar. Then we also have scrolling and numbing of any kind. And some people cope through overthinking. They live in the head and they analyze everything instead of feeling anything. And some cope by being needed, by overgiving, by staying useful so they don't have to sit with what's underneath. And none of these are failures. They're actually intelligent adaptations. But here's the cost. When we don't feel, we don't actually rest. The body stays on guard, and that's why burnout doesn't always come from doing too much. Sometimes it comes from not feeling at all. And another cost is that life slowly loses color. You might function well, but you don't really feel alive. And then there's the deeper cost. When you can't feel yourself, you can't truly meet another human either. I mean, sure, you can connect and you can relate, you can perform closeness, but it is very hard to stay present in real in it over a long time. So connection starts to feel exhausting or unsafe. And the goal here is not to feel more, it is to feel safely. And a nervous system that learned early on that feeling wasn't welcome will always find substitutes. That is why cravings, overworking, or numbing are not random. They are all attempts to regulate without vulnerability. And this is why forcing yourself to be more emotional doesn't actually work. It's about rebuilding internal safety so the body doesn't have to shut feelings down in the first place. So you don't need coping mechanisms to survive your own inner world. So if you notice yourself constantly reaching for something just to get through the day or to take the edge off or just to feel okay again, there is nothing wrong with you. Your system just adapted, and the invitation is not to judge that, but to ask yourself, what did I stop feeling in order to survive? Because the cost of not feeling isn't just discomfort, it's disconnection from your own aliveness. There's a particular way not feeling shows up that's often more normalized or even praised, and it lives in the feminine spectrum. And in this pattern, there's usually more emotion, more awareness, more sensitivity. But there's also a wound underneath it, the need to be chosen, approved of, and validated. So feeling becomes selective. You don't stop feeling completely, you just stop feeling the emotions that might threaten connection. So your anger gets swallowed, your needs get minimized, and your truth gets edited. Because losing connection feels unbearable. So the nervous system asks you, what do I need to not feel right now to stay loved? And over time this becomes a habit. You stay tuned to others while slowly disconnecting from yourself. You become caring, supportive, understanding, and exhausted. The cost of this kind of not feeling is not obvious at first because you're still emotional, you're still relational, still good, but inside there is this slow erosion happening, resentment building that has nowhere to go, and needs that don't know how to speak. So you live in a body that is constantly bracing to keep the peace, and you walk on eggshells. And eventually connection starts to feel heavy because it's built on self-abandonment. This is not actually a flaw. This is a survival strategy, which was often learned early when staying connected mattered more than staying true. But the cost shows up later as burnout or anxiety or cravings. and this quiet sense of disappearing. And healing here is not about becoming harder or less caring. It's about learning that connection doesn't have to require self-erasure, that your feelings don't endanger love, and that safety can exist inside you, not just between you and others. There's another way not feeling shows up, and it's often much harder to see. It lives in the masculine spectrum. And in this pattern, emotions were never really welcome to begin with. Because from early on, the message was clear. Don't be weak, don't be vulnerable, and don't feel too much. So the system learns something very efficient. I survive by staying in control. So instead of feeling, there's doing. Instead of vulnerability, there's competence. And instead of emotional expression, there's problem solving, productivity, achievement. And the nervous system becomes self-contained. Not because connection isn't wanted, but because dependence once felt dangerous. So emotions don't disappear, they get redirected. Sadness gets buried, fear turns into tension, grief goes unacknowledged, and often anger becomes the only emotion that still has permission to exist. And the cost of this kind of not feeling often looks like strength on the outside. You're capable, reliable, independent, but inside there's distance from your own inner world, from your body, and from the subtle signals that say something isn't right. Because when you don't feel, you don't notice the early signs. You don't notice the stress that builds quietly or the body that compensates. The system keeps going until one day it can't. And the shutdown may feel sudden, but it really wasn't. This is not emotional failure. This is a survival strategy. And the one that prioritized autonomy and control when feeling didn't feel safe. But the cost shows up later as burnout, emptiness, chronic tension, or a sense of moving through life without really being in it. And healing here isn't about becoming emotional overnight. It's about slowly restoring access to sensation. Learning to notice what the body feels before it has to scream. Letting feelings return not as a loss of control, but as information. Because feeling doesn't weaken strength, it gives it depth. And when the body learns it's safe to feel again, control is not lost, it's no longer needed. Something interesting happens when feminine and masculine way of not feeling meet in relationships. And often they're drawn to each other. The feminine pattern, the attuned, emotional, and relational, meets the masculine pattern, contained, controlled, and self-sufficient. And at first, it can feel like balance. One feels deeply, the other feels steady. One brings connection, and the other brings structure. But underneath, something more subtle is happening. The feminine nervous system often learns I stay connected by adapting, so feelings get minimized, needs get delayed, and truth gets edited to preserve closeness. And the masculine nervous system often learns I stay safe by staying in control. So emotions get managed, vulnerability gets postponed, and sensations get overridden to maintain autonomy. And together they can unintentionally reinforce each other. One reaches, the other contains. One expresses, the other withdraws. One feels too much, the other feels too little. And it's not because either is wrong, but because both are protecting something. And over time, this creates tension. The feminine side can feel unseen, unsupported, or emotionally alone, even in connection. And the masculine side can feel overwhelmed, pressured, or even invaded, even when nothing is being asked. And neither is actually being met, because real connection requires two nervous systems that can feel safely at the same time. Not one adapting and not one controlling, but both staying present. And when feeling is not safe for one or both, connection turns into strategy. Who gives more, who pulls away, who holds it together, and intimacy becomes exhausting. Healing here doesn't mean one side becoming more like the other. It means each learning to feel without losing themselves. The feminine learning that truth doesn't destroy connection, and the masculine learning that feeling doesn't destroy control. And when both nervous systems feel safe, something shifts. Connections stop being negotiated. They become mutual. And that's when relationships stop feeling like work and start feeling like home. So restoring feeling is not about forcing emotions. It's about restoring safety, because the nervous system only opens when it believes it won't be overwhelmed, punished, or abandoned. And for some people, feeling became unsafe because it threatened connection. For others, it became unsafe because it threatened control. And those were different stories with the same outcome. The body learned, don't go there. So safety has to come first. And safety doesn't mean everything suddenly feels good. It simply means the body learns it can stay with sensation without needing to escape it. And safety starts small. It starts with honoring what you feel instead of overriding it, letting emotions exist without immediately fixing, explaining, or minimizing them. It starts with staying with yourself after you speak your truth, resting without guilt, and noticing when your body tenses, and responding with curiosity instead of pressure. So this is how feeling slowly returns. It's not like an emotional flooding, but a sensation and a sense of what's aligned before the mind catches up. And when feeling is restored safely, something changes. You don't need as many coping mechanisms. Cravings are not as strong or urgent as they used to be. And burnout stops escalating because the body no longer has to shout to be heard. Safety gives you back choice. Choice to stay, choice to leave, and choice to respond instead of react. Feeling doesn't come back through force. It comes back when the body learns that it won't be left alone with what it feels. And that's how aliveness returns. Nothing here was about becoming more emotional or fixing yourself or forcing change. It was about remembering that not feeling was once intelligent. It kept you safe, it helped you adapt, and it allowed you to survive what you couldn't change at that time. But survival is not the same as living. When feeling starts to return safely, it doesn't arrive as intensity, it arrives as presence. You start noticing when something is too much before it becomes overwhelming. You feel desire again and less urgency for cravings. And you sense when something is aligned without having to overthink it. When feeling returns, you don't suddenly know all the answers, but you know yourself. You don't have to abandon yourself to stay connected. You don't have to shut down to stay in control. And you don't have to wait for collapse to be allowed to change. Feeling doesn't make life easy. It makes it honest. So if there is one thing I want you to take away from this series, it's this. You were never broken for not feeling, and you're not behind for needing safety first. Your system learned exactly what it needed to learn, and when it's time, it can learn something new.